You disgust me! Get out of my house right now!
Have you ever
Get out
wondered,
of my house
even
right
with
now!
everything you have, why do you still feel empty? Even standing at the top, why can't you find true happiness? Welcome to the story of Eden Harras, a 32-year-old billionaire owning an impressive financial empire and living a life many dream of. But behind this glamorous exterior lies a heart full of emptiness and a life lacking the most important thing, love. Follow Eden's journey as he goes from a man living for money and status to discovering that happiness isn't what you own, but what you truly feel. Will he dare to change everything in search of the path that truly leads to happiness? Don't miss out. Subscribe to the channel and join us in uncovering this inspiring story. Eden Harras gazed at his reflection in the mirror, his expression cold, like the glass itself reflected the image of a man who knew no fatigue. The lights from the Beacon Hill mansion cast a shimmering trail, reflecting every sharp detail of his face. At 32 years old, with a mighty financial empire in his hands, Eden always felt he was living in the light of success. But he knew behind that gleaming exterior was a void that could never be filled. The golden light from the lamps fell on the grand painting of the house, where lavish parties and a life of opulence were once the ultimate goals he had set for himself. The luxurious leather chairs, the wine cabinet filled with precious bottles, and the sparkling chandeliers seemed to be proof of his success. But when the light of these material things faded, only the darkness within him remained. Eden closed his eyes for a moment, his deep gray eyes as vast as the ocean unwavering. He did not feel happiness in his own mansion, a place where everything was perfect by societal standards. His life had been painted by numbers, contracts, and meetings with strategic partners. But in the stillness of this night, when no one else could see, he felt the emptiness within. He had everything but lacked the most important thing, love. A soft knock on the door made Eden turn. Estina, his girlfriend, entered with an alluring grace. She wore a cream silk dress, her hair flowing down, and her eyes as bright and vast as the sea. Estina was the ideal woman he had once dreamed of: beauty, sophistication, and meetings with the high society. She was the perfect blend of fame and appearance, the kind of person Eden believed he needed in a life partner. "What are you thinking about?" Estina asked, her voice sweet yet filled with expectation. Eden smiled faintly, saying nothing. He had grown accustomed to keeping his thoughts to himself. "Nothing important," he replied, trying to soothe the discontent in his heart. Estina sat beside him, her eyes constantly seeking his attention. "What do you think about our wedding? The whole family is eagerly waiting." Eden sighed, the approaching wedding making him feel slightly uneasy. A part of him wanted a change in his life, but another part feared that change would bring unpredictable risks. His love for Estina was not something he had sought for long, but rather a practical choice in a world where everything had to be perfectly arranged. "The wedding is something we have to do," Eden said in a low voice. "We'll have a wonderful ceremony." Estina smiled, satisfied with his answer. She gently touched Eden's hand, but in her gaze there was a coldness and invisible control that made Eden feel uneasy. At that moment, a faint light from the window shone in, creating a small patch of light on the floor. Eden looked towards the window where the city lights still flickered. That was the life of the world outside a world he had once been a part of, a world in which he now felt lost. "Estina, have you ever felt that everything is just a play?" Eden suddenly asked, his voice filled with contemplation. Estina looked at him surprised. "What are you talking about? This is a perfect life. Everything we do is to create this image. But is that image worth it?" Eden asked, his eyes now locked with hers, seeking an understanding he had been unable to find throughout the years. Estina shrugged, not too concerned. Don't think too much about it, Eden. Life is about what we can build, and we've built a perfect life. Eden remained silent, saying no more. He felt suffocated in this space where everything had material value, yet there was no true value to be found. All the things he had pursued could not bring him the peace or satisfaction he truly desired. The night outside the window was still, but inside Eden a storm quietly stirred. He felt himself standing between two worlds, one filled with the glittering lights of money and status, and another dim but containing the true values he had never dared to face. In that lavish mansion there was only light and shadow. One side was perfection, the other emptiness. But what mattered most was that in homes full of light, sometimes we cannot find ourselves. Eden knew that if he didn't change, he would forever remain a bystander and would never find true meaning in his life. In that moment, a name, a woman, Rose, appeared in his mind. She was the housekeeper, but perhaps she was the only one in this mansion who had never treated him with eyes full of expectation or possession. Eden didn't know why, but the feeling of Rose, someone he had never paid attention to, suddenly came to his mind. She wasn't the perfect part of his life, but perhaps she was exactly what he had been missing, a strange spark in this world full of darkness. Eden woke up the next morning in his vast room, the dim light of dawn streaming through the heavy silk curtains. He sat on the bed, looking out the window where the early morning sunlight was not yet strong enough to dispel the thick mist hanging over the streets. The feeling of emptiness still enveloped him like a shadow that could not be chased away. Despite the surrounding luxury, he felt alone inside, as though his life was just an endless play with no resolution. The mansion was quiet, only the steady ticking of the large clocks in the living room breaking the silence. Eden stood up, walking around the spacious room. He looked into the mirror on the wall and saw himself a man with perfect looks but facing deep issues that he couldn't resolve. He hadn't thought he would feel so tired, but ever since he began questioning his life, the decisions he'd made, everything had become more uncomfortable than ever. Especially the silence of Estina. She was always beautiful, perfect, but lacked the sincerity he sought. It was a relationship in which Eden felt no real connection. She liked everything to be beautiful and perfect, but she didn't care about the true emotions inside him. Eden walked down to the dining room where Estina was already sitting absorbed in a fashion magazine, smiling contentedly at the pages. She was always confident about her appearance and wasn't shy to show it in front of Eden. "Good morning, darling," Estina said softly when she saw Eden enter, though her tone lacked enthusiasm. Eden responded with a nod, saying nothing more. He could clearly feel the tension in the air, but didn't know how to resolve it. The maid Rose entered carrying a tray of breakfast. Eden couldn't help but notice how she moved, graceful and light, yet purposeful. Her eyes briefly met his, but then she quickly turned away, revealing no emotion. Eden wondered if she noticed the change in the way he looked at her. Did she know he had started to see her differently? Or was it just in his mind? Estina, sitting there, watched Rose with a sharp, cold gaze but said nothing. She never liked the presence of servants, no matter how talented or persistent they were. Everything in her life had to be perfectly arranged, and people like Rose were simply tools for her to achieve that. When Rose set the tray of food on the table, Eden observed her intently, unable to hide his curiosity. She was always humble, but there was something special about her that he couldn't explain. It was as if Rose never tried to attract his attention, but there was a strong quietness about her, as if she didn't need to prove anything at all. Estina furrowed her brow, breaking the silence. Rose, be careful with the food. I don't want anything to happen to that plate, she said, her hand reaching out as though to control everything in the house. Rose gently bowed her head, saying nothing, but the contempt in Estina's words made Eden feel a strange unease. He knew there was a complicated relationship between Estina and Rose. It wasn't just because of class distinction, but also because Estina viewed Rose as an object she had the right to control. Rose, why do you look so tired today? Eden asked, his voice unexpectedly softer than usual. Rose looked up at him in surprise, her dark eyes reflecting an emotion Eden couldn't decipher. It's nothing, Mr. Harras, she replied, her tone calm and even. Just work. Eden silently watched her, feeling a stir in his heart. There was something in the way she spoke, in the way she stood there, that made him feel as though Rose was hiding something deep inside her. She wasn't like the others in his world, not like Estina nor the people at parties or important meetings. Rose was someone real with genuine emotions he couldn't deny. You seem different today, Eden said, his voice lowering. Is something wrong? Rose was silent for a moment, as though weighing her response. She finally looked up, her eyes full of respect, but also revealing something she couldn't hide. Sir, I don't want to trouble you. I'm just doing my job. Eden felt a tension in her words, and he couldn't explain why he was paying attention to every movement of Rose. He had always seen her as just a maid, part of the luxury that surrounded him. But now he was beginning to feel that she was something much more important. Estina suddenly broke the silence, not looking at Eden, but directing her attention to Rose. Maybe we need another maid. Don't you think Rose seems a bit lazy with her work? Eden was surprised by Estina's bluntness. She didn't hesitate to speak harshly, even if it could hurt someone. He looked at Rose and saw her lower her eyes, but there was something in her gaze, a determination Eden clearly noticed. She wouldn't allow herself to be diminished. Estina, don't say that. Eden spoke up, his voice no longer as cold as usual. Rose has been working very hard. She hasn't done anything wrong. Estina looked at him, then at Rose, but said nothing more. She smiled faintly, then turned and walked out of the room, her face full of displeasure. Eden sat back down, his mind swirling with endless thoughts. He looked at his hand where the traces of past decisions remained silently. He couldn't continue living in the comfort of this world where relationships were merely material transactions. And a part of him, a part he hadn't realized before, was starting to feel something change. From now on, everything would no longer be the same. Eden could not forget the moment during breakfast that day, when emotions he couldn't explain began to rise within him. His relationship with Estina, though seemingly perfect on the surface, lacked something very important. And Rose, the maid whom he had once viewed as just another part of his luxurious world, now stirred strange emotions in him. Everything around him had begun to change, even though he wasn't ready to admit it. That day, Eden sat alone in his office, light streaming in through the window, but his mind was clouded. The numbers, contracts, and documents continued to appear on the computer screen, but nothing could dominate his thoughts except Rose. He couldn't stop thinking about her. How could someone like her make him feel so confused? She was a maid, and he was a billionaire. They had nothing in common except for the daily transactions within this mansion. But her presence, the resolute look in her dark eyes, kept him from tearing his gaze away. Nights passed and he couldn't sleep peacefully. Thoughts of Rose haunted him, becoming clearer and more vivid. He remembered the way she cleaned every corner of the house, the look she had when she didn't look at him. She never seemed to care about his presence, and perhaps that was what made her so special to him. Today, when Eden walked down to the first floor, he found himself heading toward the living room with no particular purpose, just wanting to wander in this vast space and find some peace in his soul. However, when he entered the living room, the scene before him made him stop immediately. Estina was sitting on the sofa, her cell phone playing a video about an upcoming party she was hosting. She always loved creating standout events, and Eden couldn't deny that her charm was powerful. But today, Eden clearly felt a part of him becoming indifferent to that perfection. He couldn't deny that life with Estina had become boring, lacking sincerity. "That party will be perfect," Estina said, without looking up from her phone screen, as though she hadn't noticed the change in Eden's demeanor. She continued, "We'll meet important people, people who can help us build stronger relationships." Eden just smiled, responding politely, "Yes, sounds interesting." He sat down in the chair across from her, feeling constrained in his expensive suit. For a long time, he hadn't felt interested in conversations like this anymore. The fragility of his relationship with Estina was becoming more and more apparent. Every time she spoke about the perfection in life, Eden felt like a lost shadow, overshadowed by her outward beauty, unable to see her true essence. The atmosphere in the room grew still, and Eden decided to go outside to find a bit of personal space. He walked out to the garden behind the house where flowers were blooming under the sunlight, but his mind couldn't focus on that beauty. Each step echoed on the stone path, but there was no lightness, no joy, only the rising tension in every moment. It was then that Eden heard footsteps behind him. He turned around and saw Rose walking toward him. What was she doing here? She was the maid, but why, at this moment, did he feel a connection between them? Rose walked closer, holding a basket of flowers. "Mr. Harras, I'm going to cut the flowers in the garden to decorate the living room," she said gently, yet with respect. Eden looked at her, his gaze full of curiosity. "You work so hard," he said, his voice no longer as cold as before. "You really make everything in this house perfect." Rose bowed her head but didn't respond immediately. She stood there as if pondering something very important. After a few seconds, she looked up and said, "I'm just doing my job, sir." Her words surprised Eden lightly, as though they carried something deeper. He stepped closer, looking into her dark eyes, and the sensation she gave him kept him unable to look away. "Rose, I think you're not just doing your job," Eden said, his voice seeming to grow quieter as though something bigger was slowly emerging in his mind. Rose remained silent, not reacting, but her gaze remained steadfast. She didn't seem embarrassed or flustered. She knew her role in this house, and she understood that despite the communication between them, there was an invisible gap that could not be erased. Moments of silence passed, and Eden felt as though everything was slowly changing. He couldn't explain why, but something in Rose's eyes made him want to know more about her. She wasn't like Estina, she wasn't like the others. She had a stillness that he couldn't understand, yet there was a strong allure about her. "Could you help me in the office?" Eden suddenly said, realizing he was inviting her into a space that he had previously reserved only for important people. Rose looked at him once again, not surprised, but her eyes contained a strange feeling. "Of course," she replied, her voice as gentle as ever. When Eden entered the office, he sat down in the chair across from his desk. The space was quiet, only his sighs echoing in the room. Rose stood beside him, waiting for instructions. "Rose, do you ever think about life outside of this job?" Eden asked, his voice slightly hesitant. He didn't know why he was asking this, but the feeling of closeness between them seemed uncontrollable. Rose remained silent for a few seconds, her eyes looking at him with sincerity. "I think about my family, the people I love," she replied softly, her voice low and gentle. "But this job gives me the life I have now." Eden looked at her, his gaze filled with strange empathy. He knew she wasn't just doing the simple job he thought she was, but she had dreams and desires that no one knew about. In those moments in the quiet room, he felt a marked change in his heart. He didn't know if this was just a passing disturbance or something truly profound. But these feelings, these thoughts couldn't be extinguished. And from this moment on, small flames began to ignite in Eden's heart. A fire that couldn't be controlled. A fire that couldn't be erased. The entire space in the office seemed to stop as Eden looked into Rose's eyes. Everything outside of her became blurry, as though she was the only presence in the room. Feelings he had never known before now flooded him strong and unfamiliar. He looked at Rose with curiosity and a hint of confusion, as though she was hiding a secret that he couldn't uncover immediately. Rose, though calm on the outside, was feeling a whirlwind of emotions within. She knew clearly that Eden was not like the other masters she had encountered. He didn't demand anything from her except to do her job. But his words and gaze made her feel something she couldn't explain. Rose lowered her head, avoiding Eden's gaze. She couldn't allow herself to be swept up in these feelings, couldn't let herself become part of a game she knew she couldn't win. She was a maid and her role was to do her job without ever crossing boundaries. "I'll finish my work here, sir," she said, her voice steady and measured, trying not to reveal any emotion. Eden nodded but couldn't hide the fleeting disappointment in his heart. He wanted to say something, wanted to continue the conversation, but the words were stuck in his throat. The feeling of having her near him made him uneasy, but he couldn't explain why. He wanted to know more about her, but also knew that he couldn't easily cross the boundaries life had set for both of them. "I understand," Eden said, no longer able to say anything more. He stood up, deciding to leave the office. It felt like a part of him was looking for an escape, a reason not to face the truth he had started to realize about himself. But as Eden left the office, he felt a shift in the atmosphere. The entire house seemed quieter, and though no one said anything, he could sense the tension. Had everything changed since that day when Rose's presence began to stir everything? The feeling that he couldn't keep everything the same, that he couldn't live forever in the world he had built around him. He walked down the hall, feeling each step echoing in the vast space. He entered the living room where Estina was sitting on the sofa, her eyes still glued to her cell phone. She didn't notice the change in Eden, but something in him had changed. "Estina, we need to talk," Eden said, his voice hoarse. He didn't know where to start, but something in his heart told him that he couldn't continue living in this falsehood anymore. Estina looked up, looking at him with annoyance. "Talk. Can't you wait a bit? I'm preparing for tonight's party." But Eden couldn't wait anymore. He looked straight at her, his eyes colder than ever. "I don't want to continue like this, Estina. We need to be honest with each other." Silence stretched between them. And though Estina might have wanted to hide something, she couldn't deny the truth Eden had just spoken. She had seen the change in his eyes, but she didn't want to admit that their relationship was slowly falling apart. Deep down, she knew there was nothing left to hold on to. Everything had changed, and there was nothing she could do to save it. "Eden, you can't always just think about yourself." Estina said, her voice cold. "I don't have time for these pointless conversations. We have to do everything to maintain our status in society." Eden closed his eyes, feeling like a dark cloud was engulfing him. The feeling of being trapped in a loveless marriage surrounded only by power and prestige left him disheartened. He couldn't continue living like this. He didn't want to live in this falsehood any longer. "I'm tired of everything," Eden said, his voice hardening. "Of the way you treat everyone of this life. I don't want to continue." Estina looked up, looking at him in disbelief. She never expected him to say such words. She couldn't understand why Eden had changed so much, why he no longer wanted to hold on to what they had built. "You can't do this, Eden," she said, trying to keep calm. "You can't throw everything away just because of a maid." Estina's words were like a slap in Eden's heart. He felt like he was being pulled back into the world he had tried to escape. But this time, he couldn't go back. He couldn't keep living in this false world anymore. Eden, why? Estina opened her mouth but couldn't say anything more. She looked into his eyes, unable to understand the change in him, the change she couldn't control. Eden turned away, no longer looking at her. He walked out into the garden where dark clouds were beginning to gather. He felt the tension in his heart, but at the same time a strange sense of liberation. He didn't know what to do next, but he knew one thing: he couldn't live in this falsehood any longer. His steps became firmer, and although his emotions were mixed, he felt himself moving forward. The sense of freedom he had never felt before began to seep into his mind. And from this moment on, he decided not to let fear control his life anymore. He had changed. Everything had changed. Eden stood in the garden, his hands hanging loosely by his sides, watching as dark clouds drifted lazily across the sky. Though the morning had only just passed, the air around him felt heavy, as if a storm had already passed through. He had been standing there for a long time, not knowing what to do nor what to say. All his emotions swirled within him like a storm, but he could not find a way out. Why did he feel this way? Why, with all his power and success, did he feel so lost? The important decisions in his life, the changes he was facing, all came from a conversation that had never been part of the plan. He hadn't expected his relationship with Rose to confuse him so much. She was a maid, a person from a class Eden had always considered invisible. But now her image was always present in his mind. Every time she looked at him, he felt pulled into a whirlwind that he couldn't stop. But he knew once he began to step in, he could never go back. As he entered the room, the light of the evening sun streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floor. Rose stood by the large table, gently arranging the fresh flowers she had just picked from the garden. The room was silent, only the soft music playing from a small speaker. Eden couldn't resist walking closer, standing still. As he watched her, Rose seemed unaware of his presence. She was focused on her work, delicately placing each flower into the glass vase, as if she were creating a work of art that only she could understand. Eden. Rose suddenly said, her voice soft but clear in the quiet space. Is something wrong? He was slightly startled, but quickly regained his composure. Nothing, he replied, his voice sounding a little strange. I just wanted to say that your work is amazing. You make everything more beautiful. Rose said nothing, simply lowering her head, but her gaze met his. A moment of silence passed, and in that moment, Eden sensed a strange shift in the room. He realized he wasn't just looking at a maid, but a person with resilience and dignity that he had never noticed before. She didn't need his recognition, but she deserved it. He couldn't deny that the feelings rising within him couldn't just be ordinary admiration. Rose, what do you think about everything? Eden asked, his voice hesitant. This simple question held much more meaning than it seemed. He wasn't just asking about her work, but about the deeper things within her, things he knew he couldn't fully understand. Rose remained silent for a long time, as though pondering the question. I don't think about it much, sir, she replied. I just do my work and live my life. But there was something in her voice that made Eden feel she was hiding a very important part of her life, a part he couldn't understand. But he wanted to know. He wanted to know why she was like that. He wanted to know if she had dreams, if she had hopes, or if she simply lived this simple life without ever thinking of the future. Don't you have dreams? Eden asked, this time his voice genuinely serious. I believe everyone has some kind of dream. Rose looked at him, her gaze gentle. My dream is to make my life meaningful. She said, her voice calm, but Eden noticed a strange resilience in her eyes. My dream is to live freely, not to live depending on others. Her words startled Eden. Freedom. He had never truly thought about freedom. He had all the power, all the wealth, but was he truly free? He could do anything he wanted, but could he live true to himself? All his decisions had always been influenced by the rules society had set for him. He had to maintain his reputation, uphold the empire his father had built. But what about him? Was he living the life he truly wanted? What about you, Eden? Rose suddenly asked, causing him to freeze. Do you feel free? Eden didn't answer immediately. He sat down in the chair by the table looking into Rose's eyes. And suddenly he realized he couldn't answer that question. He couldn't say that he felt free. He felt bound by the very wealth and power he had spent his life building. It was a vortex. He couldn't escape a trap he had set for himself. I don't know, Eden said after a moment of silence. I don't know if I'm free. His answer made the air in the room feel heavy. Rose didn't say anything more, only gently picked up the vase and placed it on the table. Her steps were so light, so patient, as if she were gradually building something very important, not just a flower arrangement, but her life. After a while, Eden stood up and walked out of the room, but his mind remained tangled with Rose's words. He couldn't shake the strange emotions she stirred in him. He couldn't stop thinking about what she had said about freedom and the life he had never considered. The question he couldn't answer still echoed in his mind like a call from within. Was he truly free? Eden stepped out of the room feeling like a strong wave crashing into his mind. The feeling of unease was stronger than ever. He couldn't understand why Rose had made him stop and think about everything he had always considered certain, something that was supposed to be obvious in his life. Everything he had built, status, power, wealth, suddenly seemed dim and no longer the most important thing. He stood still by the window looking out over the vast garden, the branches swaying in the gentle breeze. But his mind was far from peaceful. He thought about what Rose had said about her dream, about the freedom she sought in every small action, as if it were the most precious thing. Eden suddenly realized that throughout his life, he had never truly sought freedom, never truly lived for himself. He had always been controlled by what others expected, by what society demanded. And now, in this moment, Eden felt like a drifting ship, unsure of its direction, not knowing how to escape the blinding light of fame and power. But there was one thing he couldn't deny. Rose had touched a part of him that he had never known existed. She wasn't just a maid, not just a part of the life he had once seen as simple. She was a person with dreams, with a desire to be free, to live a life unbound. And most of all, she wasn't afraid to face the truth, not afraid to ask the questions that Eden had always avoided. Could I really not live for myself? Eden wondered, his gaze still fixed on the scene outside. What is holding me back? He turned around when he heard footsteps approaching from behind. It was Estina, the girlfriend he had lived with for all these years. She entered, her face, as usual, beautiful but cold, walking with the light but decisive steps of someone accustomed to control. Aren't you going outside yet? Estina asked, her voice tinged with impatience. We'll need to meet with important partners soon. Are you sure you don't want to prepare anything for tonight? Eden looked at her, but his mind was still consumed by other thoughts. He couldn't just pretend that everything was fine anymore. He couldn't continue living in a relationship based only on convenience and obligation. Estina, we need to talk, Eden said, his voice low and serious. Estina stopped eyeing him suspiciously but then sat down on the chair across from him, her arms crossed. "Talk about what?" "We can't keep going like this," Eden replied, his eyes fixed on her, but his heart seemed to be searching for an answer to himself. "I can't keep living in the shadow of a life I don't truly want." Estina sighed deeply, then smiled faintly, though there was no joy in it. "You know, Eden, life isn't always like in the movies. We can't always live by our emotions. We have responsibilities, obligations. You can't just throw everything away because of some ambiguity." Eden stared at her, his heart filled with discomfort. He couldn't understand why she could say these things when she herself wasn't happy in this life. She lived for what others expected, not for herself. But he knew if he continued in this relationship, he would forever live in the shadow of falsehood and pressure. "So you want me to continue living in this shell?" Eden asked, his voice no longer patient. "Don't you get it? I don't want to pretend anymore. I can't live a life where I can't be myself." They both fell silent, the unspoken words unable to express the tangled emotions in Eden's heart. Estina finally stood up, her eyes full of restraint. "You make the decision, Eden." Estina said, her voice cold. "But I don't think you'll do anything other than continue living like this." She turned and walked out of the room without looking back. Eden stood there, his heart feeling torn apart. He had made a decision, but why did it feel so heavy? Could he truly give up everything he had, everything that everyone in this society always dreamed of? He couldn't answer that question. But he knew that there was only one thing he could do right now. Decide the path he would take, face everything that had happened, and the feelings he was holding inside. And would he have the courage to do so? Eden sat alone in his expansive office, his hands tightly clutching a cold cup of coffee, his eyes staring out the window. The dark sky outside couldn't obscure the light from the flickering city lights reflected on the glass. But in his mind, there was only darkness. A vague, suffocating darkness was slowly enveloping him, paralyzing all his thoughts and emotions. He couldn't find a way out. His relationship with Estina was officially over. No one could have predicted it would end this way. She left coldly, without a word of explanation, without a trace of regret. Eden didn't feel pain, but an overwhelming emptiness consumed him. He had nothing left. No Estina, no seemingly perfect relationship. It had all been a facade, a cloak protecting him from things he had always tried to escape. He sighed, setting the cup of coffee down on the table and looking at the computer screen. Financial reports, contracts work, calls, all of it seemed meaningless now. Everything felt pointless. In that moment, he felt small, like a pawn in a game whose rules he didn't understand. He hadn't had the courage to change, to live a different life, a life that truly belonged to him. But then a voice broke the silence from the door. "Eden, do you have a moment?" Rose appeared in the doorway, her eyes looking at him with genuine concern, not as a maid, but as a person who viewed him with patience and empathy that he had never felt before. Rose had become an irreplaceable part of his life, but not as a servant, rather as a friend, someone he never expected to find comfort in. Eden looked up at her, then stood up. "Of course, come in." He invited her not just out of politeness, but because he truly needed her presence at that moment. Rose walked into the room, gently closing the door behind her, and stood facing Eden. Each step she took seemed to evoke an indescribable peace. She wore a simple dress, not overly striking, but still exuding grace and gentleness. Her hair hung down, creating a softness that contrasted sharply with Estina's coldness. Rose didn't need the luxury, didn't need the things Eden once thought were important, but it was her simplicity that made him stop and reflect on himself. Is something wrong, Rose? Eden asked, his voice tinged with a hint of worry. Don't you have work to do? Rose looked at him with sincere eyes. You don't seem all right, Eden. You haven't told me what happened between you and Estina. She's gone, but you don't seem to have found the answers within yourself. Eden sat back in his chair, feeling the warmth of Rose's gaze that he couldn't ignore. She didn't need an explanation, but he felt the urge to share, to speak the thoughts he had long kept inside. He couldn't keep hidden the things that had hurt him. Estina left Rose. Eden said, his voice slow. She's no longer in my life. I know she wasn't the person I truly loved, but I can't deny that I've lived in a fake relationship, not with her, but with myself. Rose sat down in the chair across from him, her gaze full of understanding without a hint of judgment. She simply listened, looking at him as though waiting for him to continue. I've always lived to please others. Eden continued, his voice starting to choke up. I've forgotten who I am. I've forgotten the dreams, the desires I once had. I've only lived according to the rules society set to build an empire that doesn't belong to me. And now, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to escape this vicious cycle. Rose nodded gently, saying nothing more. She understood. She understood that those who lived in Eden's world where money, power, and success were everything often found themselves trapped in a cycle with no escape. And more than anyone, she understood that he needed to choose a new path, a path where he could find himself again. Eden, you don't have to have everything right away, Rose said, her voice gentle but firm. You can start small. Choose what truly belongs to you. You're not a tool for this system. You are a person with feelings, dreams, and the power to change your own life. Rose's words hit Eden like a powerful shock to his mind. He looked at her confused, as though he were realizing for the first time that he could have a choice. He wasn't just a pawn in the power game he had lived in for so long. He could change. He could live the way he wanted to. So what do you think I should do? Eden asked. His eyes filled with confusion but also with a flicker of hope. I don't know if I have the courage to start over. Start with yourself, Eden, Rose replied, smiling lightly. Just dare to recognize what's important to you. Dare to face the truth about yourself. And then walk that path. Change doesn't have to be grand. Just take one small step every day. Eden felt a sense of relief in his heart. Perhaps this was the beginning. Perhaps the steps ahead would be long and difficult, but he no longer felt like a lost soul in the dark. Rose had given him faith in a life he could choose, a life where he could live true to himself. Do you believe I can do it? Eden asked, not with doubt, but with curiosity and hope. You've already done so much in your life, Rose replied, her voice certain. Just start believing in yourself. A moment of silence passed, but in that space, Eden felt a shift in his heart. A new determination was rising in him, strong and clear. He would change not just because he wanted to escape his relationship with Estina, but because he wanted to live a life that truly belonged to him. As Rose stood to leave, Eden watched her. He felt that even though the road ahead would be long at least, now he wasn't walking alone. Rose had given him the strength to begin again. And a part of him knew that not only his life was changing, but love, a love he never expected, was slowly beginning to take root. Eden stood by the window gazing out at the faint light of the evening. Thoughts swirled in his mind. He was no longer the person he had once been. The decisions he had made before now seemed vague and full of doubt. His actions from yesterday, a conversation with Rose, a turning point, had disrupted his world. He began to realize that he didn't just need to change how he lived, but also how he saw himself and the world around him. Step by step, every passing moment, Eden felt that change, like waves crashing on the shore, unstoppable, but also irreversible. He could no longer live for anything outside of himself. He had to live for himself, for the dreams that had long been buried, for the justice he had always been indifferent to. Suddenly, his phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. The screen displayed the name of an old friend, a co-founder of the company he was running, Blake Harrison. Eden answered the call, his eyes still focused on the swaying branches outside. "Eden, listen up." Blake's voice came through, sounding a bit anxious. "What's going on, Blake?" Eden asked, trying not to reveal his exhaustion. "It's bad," Blake said immediately. "The company is in trouble. Stocks have plummeted after accusations of mistreatment of employees. A number of workers' rights groups are protesting. Everything seems to be falling apart fast. I need your help to make a decision." Eden sighed softly. He had been used to the noise, to sophisticated management strategies. But this time, everything felt too close. It wasn't just a number on a financial report, it was about the people he had forgotten. "What's most important right now?" Eden asked, though in his heart he already knew the answer. "The company is being heavily criticized, Eden. The accusations of discrimination against employees could ruin our reputation if we don't act fast," Blake replied. Eden hung up the phone helplessly. He could feel Blake's tension, but it didn't help him at this moment. He felt as though he was standing at a crossroads. One side was his career power and everything he had built over the years. The other side was the truth he could no longer escape: love for justice and for those who had been treated unfairly. He took out his phone and called Rose, feeling as though a part of him was aching inside. "Rose," he said when she picked up, his voice gentle but full of resolve. "I think I'm ready." "Ready for what?" Rose asked, her voice deep but still gentle and warm. "I want to change," Eden replied, his voice firm. "I want to start over. Not just for myself, but for those who've been forgotten, those who have been trampled by this system." Rose was silent for a long while, but Eden knew she was carefully considering what he had just said. Finally, she spoke. "Eden, I believe you can do it. But you need to be prepared for what's to come. It won't be easy. Don't think everything will change with just one decision." Eden gripped the phone tightly, feeling a calmness he had never experienced before. Rose was right. This wasn't a battle he could win overnight, but he was ready to face every challenge. "I'm ready," Eden said once again. "I need to change my life." From that moment on, Eden began a new journey, not just to seek justice for the oppressed, but to find himself again. He felt a new strength rising within him, a burning fire to do what was right. In the weeks that followed, Eden focused on changing the company from the ground up. He began attending meetings with the staff groups, listening to and understanding the struggles they faced. He no longer saw them as numbers on a financial report, but as people with lives and families. But Eden's company, with its complex relationships and intertwined interests, wasn't quick to accept change. Longtime colleagues, partners in the company, were unhappy with his proposals for major changes to employee policies and treatment. They believed these changes would harm the company's profits and tarnish the reputation they had spent years building. Eden didn't find it easy to implement these changes. He faced opposition from all sides, but that didn't stop him. Every morning he thought about what Rose had said about justice and what he truly wanted to contribute. Rose was always by his side, supporting him on this journey. Their conversations became deeper. Eden began to understand that life wasn't just about achieving success. It was about making a real difference, a difference that could change the world he was living in. One evening, as they sat together in a small cafe amidst conversations about work, Rose said something that made Eden pause and reflect. Eden, have you ever thought that love and justice could go hand in hand? Perhaps you're searching for something bigger than this company, something that could change who you are. Eden looked into Rose's eyes, feeling a connection he had never found with anyone else. He realized that in this journey he wasn't just fighting for justice, but for love. A love he never expected, but now it was an essential part of his life. You're right, Eden replied, smiling for the first time in months. I'm searching for something bigger, something I never imagined could be mine. Rose smiled back, and in that moment, Eden felt he was no longer alone on this path. He had Rose, and with her, he believed he could create a fairer world. The first light of dawn slipped through the gaps in the windows, casting a golden hue over the space in Eden's office. The vast, luxurious surroundings couldn't diminish the sense of stillness within him. A stillness he had once been so familiar with, yet now it made him feel lost and empty. Eden sat there, his hands intertwined, staring intently at the computer screen where financial reports and upcoming projects were displayed. He had once been enamored with numbers and wealth-building strategies. But now, those numbers were just hollow characters unable to revive the burning passion that had once consumed him. The things he had once deemed important were now just facades hiding the truth about a life he had always tried to avoid. Looking out the window, Eden watched as yellow leaves fell like moments from the past decisions he had made and could never take back. He felt a change within himself, not only because of the shocks at the company, but because this change started deep within him, the change that he could no longer escape. As everything seemed to be crumbling, Eden realized he needed to find another way. He could no longer just be a talented manager, no longer just a successful man in the eyes of society. He had to become a real person, someone with responsibility, with love, and with justice. But that journey of change was not easy. Everything he had known was now being challenged. The questions about the purpose of life, about love and justice, kept haunting him, not allowing him to escape. One day, as sunlight poured through the window, making the gemstones in his office sparkle, Rose walked in. She wasn't carrying any burdens, only a calm demeanor, a look full of determination. She was the only one who could make Eden feel that life could still change, that there were things that could hold him back. "What are you thinking about?" Rose asked, sitting down across from him. The question didn't make Eden feel intruded upon. On the contrary, he felt her genuine care. "About the things I've overlooked," Eden replied, his voice slow and thoughtful. "About the paths I've taken, the choices I've made." Rose looked at him gently without needing to say much. She understood. She had always understood Eden more than anyone else. "So how do you want to change?" Rose asked, still holding that steady gaze. Her question wasn't a challenge, but a gentle encouragement. Eden sighed, his hands tightening on the desk. "I want to change my company, but not just for financial gain. I want to change the way we treat workers. I want them to be respected more. I want the company to be more than just a money-making machine." Rose smiled, her eyes lighting up. "That's the first step. You're not just thinking about your own benefit, but also about others. That's the biggest change you can make." Eden looked at her, feeling the strength in her words. He felt that not just his company but his entire life needed to change. He couldn't continue living in luxury without responsibility, without love, and without justice. He needed to find himself again to live a life that he truly deserved. "So, how do you plan to start?" Rose asked. Her eyes still filled with trust. Eden smiled. "I'll start with the small steps. First changing the company, then changing myself. I'll meet with the employees, listen to their struggles, to their desires. I want to understand them, not just see them as numbers on reports." "And what will you do after that?" Rose continued, encouraging him to think further. And then I'll use those changes to rebuild the company. But more importantly, I will live a life I can be proud of. I will love and respect everyone around me, and I will work to create a fairer world, one where everyone has equal opportunities. Rose nodded, her eyes shining. That's the right path, Eden. I believe you can do it. Eden stood up, looking out the window once more. He felt the change within him, a change that he couldn't turn back from. He had made his decision. No matter how difficult the road ahead, he wouldn't look back. Rose, you've given me the strength to begin again. I don't know where I'll go, but I believe I'm going in the right direction. Eden said, his voice filled with determination. Rose stood up and walked closer to him. You already have everything you need. Love, justice, and determination. Now all that's left is for you to take the step. Eden smiled, his gaze toward Rose filled with gratitude. Thank you. I won't forget this. The bright light of morning filtered through the window, lifting the veil of the long night and casting the first rays into the room where Eden stood. He looked at himself in the mirror, his eyes tired but full of determination. Today was an important day. He felt that something was changing in his life, something he had been waiting for all these years, but not because of his career or success anymore, but because of something he had never dared to admit: true happiness. Happiness was not the recognition of those around him, nor was it the extravagant parties or business calls he had once immersed himself in. Happiness was found in simple moments, in the deep connection with the person you love, in choosing to live a meaningful life. Stepping out of his vast office, Eden entered the dining room where Rose had been waiting for him. She wasn't wearing lavish clothes, nor was she adorned with makeup. She wore a simple dress, her hair neatly tied, and her eyes radiated warmth, something he had never found in anyone else. She was the one who had taught him that happiness wasn't something you could buy, but a feeling of completeness within. Good morning, Eden. Rose smiled, her voice gentle but full of affection. She handed him a cup of coffee just the way he liked it. Eden smiled, feeling the warmth of the cup in his hands. He looked at Rose and saw the peace in her eyes. He understood that happiness was when you could share everything in life with the one you love, even the smallest things. Good morning, Rose. He responded, his voice gentle and full of appreciation. Do you think you're ready? Rose looked at him, her eyes full of hope. Eden nodded. I think I'm ready. Ready to begin a new life, a life where I don't just live for myself, but for others as well. Eden's words seemed simple, but to him, they were the culmination of a long journey. He was no longer the man who only knew work and success. He was no longer the man seeking recognition from the outside world. Now he understood that true happiness was when you lived a meaningful life, when you knew how to love and share. The two of them sat down to breakfast together, not in a hurry, not anxious. Rose told Eden about her plans, the lessons she had learned from managing her small business. She shared the joyful moments of her life, and Eden listened, feeling the simplicity that he had been missing all this time. He realized that even though in business he could achieve everything, what he truly needed was connection, real moments shared with the one he loved. He remembered the early days when he and Rose first met, the long conversations at night, the quiet moments when they both looked out the window and shared their dreams. After breakfast, Eden and Rose decided to go outside to enjoy a long day. They walked through the park hand in hand with no pressure from work or life. Eden felt like he was reclaiming a part of himself, a part of life he had never dared to pursue, never dared to desire. Rose, I used to think that the company, money, and success would bring me happiness. Eden said, his voice steady. But I was wrong. I found happiness when I'm with you, when I do things that matter, when we build a better future for those around us. Rose looked at him and smiled. I think so too. Happiness isn't something you can buy. It's the moments we spend together, it's love and care. It's knowing that we're not alone in this world. They continued walking under the trees, enjoying the peace and quiet. They didn't say anything more, but the unspoken words between them were the deepest understanding. They knew that no matter what life brought, no matter what challenges Eden's company might face, they still had each other. And that was the most important thing. In the afternoon, when they returned home, Eden received a call from Blake. This time, he didn't feel anxious or pressured. The call didn't confuse or stress him out anymore, because he had found balance in his life. "Eden, we need to talk about the company situation," Blake said. Eden calmly replied, "I know, I'll handle it, but for now I want to work differently. I won't just focus on profits, but on how we treat our employees, how we build a fair working environment." Blake was silent for a while, as if thinking about Eden's words. Then he responded, "You've really changed. We'll face many challenges, Eden, but I respect your decision." Eden could feel the change within himself, and he knew he couldn't go back. He wouldn't allow the company to just be a money-making machine anymore. He wanted to create a working environment where everyone was respected, a place where justice was the foundation of every decision. Eden's journey shows us that true happiness isn't found in wealth or status, but in the connections we build and the courage to live authentically. Sometimes the biggest changes start from within. If you've been inspired by Eden's story and the power of self-discovery, don't forget to like this video and share it with anyone who might need a little reminder about what truly matters. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more stories that inspire and challenge the way we think. Thanks for watching, and remember, the journey to happiness starts with one brave step. See you in the next video.